Hey everybody,
Hey everybody,
welcome to the
welcome to
Coda
the Coda
May
May
2020
2020
NYC Meetup.
NYC
I'm going
Meetup.
to say
I'm going to
NYC
say
in quotes
NYC
because
in
it really
quotes
doesn't matter
because
that
it
we're
really
in New
doesn't
York
matter that we're in
anymore.
New York anymore.
So this is really
So
just
this is really
a
just
Coda meetup,
a
I
Coda
guess,
meetup, I
for
guess,
all that we care
for
about.
all that we care about.
Today I'm really
Today I'm
excited
really
to
excited
have
to
Matt
have
Galligan,
Matt Galligan,
the VP of
the
Design
VP of
at Earnest
Design at
Research,
Earnest Research,
to join us to
to
talk
join
to
us
us
to
about
talk
some of the
to us about some
products
of the
that
products
he
that
has.
he has.
So Matt, thank you
So
for
Matt, thank
joining
you
today's
for
meetup.
joining today's meetup.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Yep. And you're in New York, right?
You're in New York, right?
I'm actually in, there's a background echo. I can swap on some headphones here if that's going to help. I am based in Pennsylvania. My company is based in New York.
Okay.
And previously I was heading into the city about once a week or so. But nowadays I'm just here in Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So you lived in New York at some point, am I right? Or were you completely remote the
Actually,
whole
no.
Oh,
I've been fairly remote the whole time. I have
okay.
been heading into the city on a regular basis, but I lived in San Francisco for about 10 years,
Right.
so was there most of the time. And then I like New York. I mean, I think I put that on my LinkedIn and stuff like that, just because
Yeah.
for anybody that's there or relevant in technology, that's what they need to know is I'm there.
Yep. Cool. So before we get into your docs, I just want to kind of learn a little bit more about you. We know you're the VP of Design at Earnest Research, but first question is your Twitter handle at MG.
Yeah.
The 2-letter handle is like a really rare commodity. So you must have signed up way back in the day, or you just got lucky. I don't know.
It's kind of both, actually. I did sign up way early in the day. My user ID is actually 607. But
Wow.
as I understand it, there's like a ton of useless like temp IDs in between there. And so somebody figured out some time ago that I was in the first like 140 people on Twitter. So I'm like 13 years on Twitter at this point or something.
Wow.
Yeah, but my original username was not MG on there.
Okay.
It was Indie Kid, which is tragic and terrible, but that was my like internet handle for a long time. And then 2008, I'm at a conference. Like I had started a company in 2007, 2008, go to this conference, and we're in this like dinner table, and it's like me and Gary Vee and Chris Messina and Dave Morin and like all these like early internet guys. And I think that it was like Gary who was calling everybody out for everybody using internet handles and like, you should use your real name, like be authentic, like kind of like early Gary Vee kind of like speak, right?
Yeah.
So we were like, all right, cool, let's just like use our real names. And my last name Galligan is not the easiest to spell for some, so I just sent a message to somebody at Twitter, and I'm like, hey, I think MG's available, can I snag that? And it was early enough where I was able to commandeer that. Of course you can't do that anymore, but that's how I got it.
Yeah.
And I have the same on Instagram and a few other services, but that's because I've just been early enough.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I have Al Chen Instagram. That's like the only like real kind of my real name I've gone, but everything else is just like, whatever. Have you used Twitter like the same consistently throughout the years, or has it fluctuated? Curious how given your like, 10 plus years now on the platform, how you've been using it.
Yeah, it changed a lot. I mean, the early days, like there was no like at replies, no retweets, no anything. And it was pretty much just like, I am eating this thing.
Yep.
And like pretty silly things if I go all the way back in that archive. Then it was like talking a lot about the different companies I was a part of. And then when I was doing Circa, which was my news company, or the news company I was a part of, I would say like I was a little too addicted, so I dialed back and was able to kind of get that a little bit under control. But then found that when I left the Bay Area, I was super disconnected, just because I wasn't a part of the conversations there, and I didn't have any sort of connection there. So I thought, okay, maybe I'll dive back into Twitter. Of course, now I'm like all day, every day, all over again, as I think we all are. And really, like, I follow folks that I want to hear from, people that are saying interesting things or news, or in this case, like productivity, like lots of different kinds of things. But I use it just all the time now.
Cool. And you mentioned Circa. I just want to kind of learn more about your experience building Circa, designing Circa, and also telling everyone what Circa was.
Yeah, so Circa would have been my third startup. And what we were doing was kind of breaking news down to its core elements. You can think like the bullet points of news. But the really special thing of what we did was we had what we just called stories or storylines, where rather than recreate this like news article all the time, every day as news progressed, we kind of just used the atoms of these bullets, and then we just like removed ones that were no longer relevant to the story as it was in that moment, added new ones that were relevant, and then kept those storylines going. If I was a reader, then I could follow those storylines, and as new things got added, I'd be notified of what the new things were. And we always kept track of what people had or hadn't seen up until that point. So we always were able to be incredibly relevant to you, the reader. And then, the reality is like this was 2012 was when we got this thing started, finished off in, I think, 2011 to 2015. And so this was kind of prior to the 2016 elections, prior to kind of the news landscape shifting. I think a lot of our original ideas are still very relevant today. I'm desperate for something like Circa again, because I would love to just like, have something keep me more informed than I am right now. But it was a hell of a project. It was a lot of fun. Had a great team.
Would you say that Twitter fills any of that void for you right now? Or is Twitter's too messy? Okay.
No, there isn't anything that really fills that void, because the one thing that it was able to do was I was interested. It's not just like tags. It's not like I'm saying like I'm interested in coronavirus. I might be interested in a very specific portion of the news, right? I might be interested in the coronavirus vaccine development progress, right? And I want to just know the like bits of the story that advance it, right? Whereas if all I do is follow a Google alert or even like a topic on Google News or Apple News or whatever, it's just blasting me with any new article about that thing with no context of what I've already read. And so unfortunately today there's really no sort of direct replacement of what we did back then, which was definitely a combination of a lot of editorial, people doing the work, editors on staff, as well as some computer work that we were doing to help power those editors.
Gotcha. Okay. I saw some talk you gave. I think it was a 2015 launch accelerator conference or something, and you gave a postmortem about Circa. I think the key takeaway was like you should have a board and something along those lines. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And also, I don't know if you had any experience working directly with Jason Calacanis. I'm a big follower of his, podcast and his stuff. So curious, just hear about your experience working with him.
Sure. So let's see here. Back then, I did do Jason asked me to do a postmortem on the stage of launch about what happened with Circa. And one of the key takeaways that I had was, in a company in an early stage, there's kind of this desire to keep ultimate control. You only have so much coming in from investment. You keep, X amount of the company for yourself and your team. And so you're not really ceding any control to anybody at that time. And in early days, like an investor might not say, I want a board seat for this investment. But the reality is like having guidance in those early days is really helpful, because sometimes you just need somebody to call bullshit on you. Or like, hey, do you think maybe we should do this other thing, or maybe focus a little bit more on monetization? And it's like, look, I don't know how old, but a like young and naive founder, and definitely made some decisions that were not appropriate to the business. And I think we're all going to do that. Call it a board, call it whatever, but just having, a trusted set of people that can, shoot straight with you, to help guide you prior to that being a formal thing. That to me was something we really missed out on, and could have been helpful. Now, I didn't have a whole lot of direct interaction with Jason other than just chatting about the service from time to time, doing his podcast, things like that. But one thing that I think he does do with companies that he does in the accelerator is kind of act as that in the early days, like him, as well as some of the other folks that are in and around, as you would find in accelerators, just people to tell you the truth about certain things, like, hey, maybe you should consider monetization strategies earlier, things like that. That can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely appreciate his kind of straight talk kind of attitude. In case you're just listening, joining in, this is the Coda NYC 2020 meetup. I'm here with Matt Galligan from Earnest Research, and shortly he'll be showing some of his Coda docs to all of you. So Matt, just kind of fast forwarding a little bit, if you want to talk a little bit about the experiences leading up to your current role as the VP of Design, feel free to talk about or omit certain parts of that story leading up to your current role.
Sure. Yeah. So after Circa finished up, I sort of wasn't sure what to do next. Ended up doing some consulting work with a company in Norway. Lived over there for 3 months, which was a wonderful experience. Wow. Kind of started developing like a product framework for how I like to build things, and would try to bring that to the companies that I was working with. Did a little bit of consulting work with a number of different companies, and then decided I was going to kind of get back into the swing of things. Had joined Postmates for a little while before realized it just wasn't quite the right fit, and that happens. And so made a change, ended up doing another startup, this time in the cryptocurrency industry. Had gotten really excited about the industry as a whole and wanted to solve some of the problems that I had seen in, as boring as it sounds, accounting of this stuff, because I felt like that was a dramatic barrier of entry for either people getting into it or, say, larger entities that would want to do interesting things with cryptocurrency. And so built a team around it. And of note is the fact that this was my first fully distributed team. So while I had team members that had been distributed in the past, everybody was in a different place. So that was a really interesting learning. And we had to develop a very different kind of communication style and, say, documentation style to make that work. Ultimately, crypto being what it was and what it is, it was challenging for that particular business to keep going as it was. So we found a partner in Kraken, and they basically took over, and I stepped aside. And so the rest of the team's still there, still working on those things or things related to it, while I sort of stepped aside and, took the big picture and just said, okay, what do I want to be doing for the next while? And I sort of, I've got a young son, and I wanted to focus on him, and I wanted to be able to take a little bit of time, clear my head a little bit, and decided I would join a team instead of, do yet again another startup. Gather steam, and maybe one of these days, who knows, 10 years, 5 years, who knows, get back into the game. And so I found a really amazing set of people at a company called Earnest Research. Was recommended to them by a VC that I knew, that they were, potentially looking, and found a really interesting story. They had this product that had product market fit. It's a consumer spend data, as well as many number of other kinds of data sets. But they're able to pretty accurately predict what a company's revenue happens to be in any given sort of like real time minus, like, say, like 3 to 7 days or so. Mm-hmm. So we can predict, say, what McDonald's made last week, and as a result, that data can be used by corporations or financial outlets for whatever kind of decision making they have. What fascinated me about the problem set was that you had this product that was working, right, but it was effectively just an Excel spreadsheet or a Tableau database or whatever. There was no front end to this, and they wanted to productize this. And so, after spending some time thinking about that problem, as well as meeting the wonderful team there, I was like, all right, this is where I want to spend my time, and join the team. The idea was that I would establish the design practice at the company, and go from there and see where it takes us. And I think that it's been about 9 months or so far, maybe a little bit less, but it's been a wonderful experience. Everybody there has been awesome. The problem set's super interesting, some difficult design challenges, and as well as, trying to bring my general obsession with tools and process into the mix as well. And so slowly but surely have been working on that with the team. We got about 100 people, so making any sort of change is challenging even at that size. But we're getting there, and so that's been fun too.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you so much for talking to us about your story. I know a lot of people in the audience are, startup founders, indie hackers, and they probably can learn a lot from you in terms of your experience and, not having a board and all that stuff. So thanks a lot for that. In case you're tuning in again, this is the May 2020 Coda NYC Meetup. We're here with Matt Galligan from Earnest Research. And Matt, multi-startup founder, you have built some really amazing Coda docs and through a variety of use cases too, which is really awesome. And would love to have you just dive into maybe a little bit about the problems you're trying to solve in Coda, and then just go through one by one your Coda docs if you'd like.
Sounds good. So I will start with one that actually solved a very particular problem that we were having at Earnest. And to give a little bit of background here, we as a company had not put Coda into our world yet. We use a number of different tools. We've got our Slack, we've got our Jira, and previously we were using Confluence, and I was just like, all right, we got to find something other than Confluence. I sort of have felt very strongly that creating a single source of truth is very important for a company, to be able to just know, where do I find this thing? Oh, I know it's going to be at least in this tool. So then to be able to go in there and identify that. We use Google Docs, quite a lot. And so, there's loads of issues with Google Docs as a wiki and things like that. So I just, from a long time ago, wanted to find a solution to work through that. And frankly, previously I'd used Notion, still love Notion, wasn't quite what was going to fit for this company. Went back to the drawing board with Confluence, and it's like, all right, well, am I just trying, too hard? Can we make Confluence work? Short of it was no. So felt like I needed to be back to the drawing board. We got to figure this out. Started to do the next level deep with Coda, and got seriously impressed with a lot of how, say, formulas can work and how the databases worked. And it opened my, sort of mind to all the different possibilities of what this could mean for our organization. Of course, what that means is I went as deep as you could get, trying to learn as much as I could get, sort of like copying all of the docs and the doc examples, deconstructing the formulas, diving in as far as I could, but then understanding that if we're going to make this work within the company, I've got to find one use case to convince everybody that this is worthwhile. Because one of the biggest challenges of bringing a new tool online is if you are not the person that just makes all the calls for the tools, like I was at my companies prior, there can be, some headwind to get something going. So to me, it was like, all right, what can I do to present a challenge that we are facing, where I know that Coda is the best solution for that challenge, right? And can very coherently speak to that. So I had already had a handful of things in mind, but then fast forward to actually somewhat recently, we had a hackathon. And one of the projects was, hey, we have this framework of competencies, right? That we use to level people within the company. Meaning when I come in and I have a certain amount of skill set and I'm an engineer, where do I level in the company for both, sort of salary purposes, as well as what is expected of me from a responsibility standpoint, and what is my career trajectory going to look like at this company? Super standard, right? At tons of companies. But at the bigger companies, they might have a custom tool they've built to do this. And the example that was provided by the people in our people department was, I believe it was Patreon had built this amazing custom tool, right?
Mm.
And
Wait,
I
like
looked at it and I was
Patreon,
like,
like the company where you can like sign up and get
yep,
donations? Okay, interesting.
yep. And I can't find the link, or else I would share it out.
It's okay.
But you could say what level you're in and like what competent, like, or what department, and get your whole like thing spelled out. And so the person that was bringing this up was like, can we get somebody in the company to build this as a hackathon project? Like HTML, all that kind of stuff, build the tool. And I was like, hey, what if I could do this in Coda? And it works exactly as intended. But now, one, we didn't spend any engineering effort or time on it. Two, I can set it up such that it's very maintainable, right? Because that's the other problem with like building custom solutions in code, is that like it's harder for people to maintain long term.
Mhm.
And that it'd be easy to use. And honestly, I of course had the ulterior motive of, the more I can prove out that Coda works for these kinds of things, and the speed in which I can do it, the more we can get folks on board. And so I presented last week the results of that, and I'll show what that's going to be. So let me share my screen here.
Awesome.
All right, you got me?
Yep.
Cool. So first off, here is what had already been built in Google Sheets. And it's just because it was the best tool that we had for this job at the time. So you get the sense here, we have our levels, and you can progress through the levels and understand, at each level, what is expected of that person. And then on the left side here, we see, what the competency is. And then if you just kind of say, jump in here, these are the things that at level 6, I am expected to know in the category of expertise. It becomes challenging because while these are the generic things that you might want to know, as you look at other specific, say, functions like engineering, you have a different set, right? Or maybe you have additions to what those levels are. So in this case, you see like this red text, which is intended to call out, this is the specific thing at this level. So
Matt, can you zoom in a little bit just so we can read it?
Yeah, of course.
A little hard to read.
That's okay. You see it a little bit better now?
It's a lot better.
So I'm able to kind of see and understand, okay, level 3, I should be, sort of gain a strong understanding of how things work and processes important to your team. For engineering, this includes documentation, blah, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to see if I could build this out in Coda. So I'm going to start with exactly how it was coded up. Now, keep in mind, a lot of what I've built here is kind of as example, but this part of the document is very, very much done. Also, you guys pushed an update today, which I'm loving, which is no longer like the folder section metaphor, but rather like section to subsection metaphor. So the doc is still a little disorganized, but bear with me here. One of the things that I do is separate out some sections that are powering things that I will eventually want to lock down. Mm-hmm. And I call that the back end. So I've created a section, previous was a folder. So there's a section called back end. So we're going to jump into data and competency. And this is going to show you how ridiculously simple this table actually is. There's two things going on. One is I wanted to establish like a way to be able to provide a numerical value. Now, granted, there's a different purpose for this later on, but at the very simplest way of explaining it, I wanted to be able to say, here's the name of this, and here is the actual numerical value, integer value that's associated with that name. Also, these names are formulas. So as I look at this and I go to edit formula, and I will zoom in here, you can tell that all it's doing is just concatenating the word level with the actual value. Very simple.
Yep.
And then when I add sort of one of these line items, so previously in the Google Doc, this would be a line item, right? So, or seek to learn and improve every day. So the way that it was entered in here was, that is your display column. Mm-hmm. The other data that I have here is this is a single select looking up at this competency level database. And then I have all the different competencies spelled out as a select list. Eventually, if I wanted to turn that into a table, I might be able to, but in the meantime, no real reason to do that. And similar with function, there may be a reason to do that later on. But for now, this is what we have. So with each one of these in mind, all we had to do was add each of the different line items. What we ended up doing with it, first off, we have this nice like landing page that helps to explain to anybody that is coming in what that means, or what it means to be able to view this document. But then I can jump in and look at these levels. Now, initially, what I had done was build it out in a very similar fashion and design as to what you saw in this. So what you would see is I set up groups. So if I open this up and jump into group, you can see that I had initially grouped by competency, which gives us that nice big block on the left. And then I grouped across the top by level, which is the same as what we saw in the Google Sheet. One area where we gained a little bit of functionality is now that I could separate the sort of function, I'm now able to see, okay, here's expertise, and then here is the specific thing that within that competency is for engineering, intended for engineering. So I did already start to gain some new functionality. But seeing it this way made me realize this is not the better way of seeing it. And so I created this view, which is now going to be our core view here. And so what you're seeing is I'm actually seeing what the competency is. We'll call it expertise. Then by level, and the columns, if you will, are now based on the role or the function. And that's useful because as an individual, I can go in here and I can see what is the progression of my role linearly from level 3 to level 7 within this specific category of competency. And I started to create some filters around this because and granted, this is just V1. This is what we had built for our purposes for today. But let's say, for example, I only wanted to see my next most adjacent level if I'm level 3. I can now do a very simple filter to just see what's relevant to me at that moment. Now, the next version of this will be, whatever you care about your level that you're at right now and something ascending or descending. You care about ascending in situations where you're going to progress through a level or progress through your career at the company. You care about descending because you care about the role and responsibility that you have up until that point. So those are some things that I want to do. Originally, I had put the slider in here, but I do think that for now, I've liked this. Also, need to spend some more time thinking about exactly how we might want to filter these things out. And then lastly, being able to filter by function, being able to just see what's relevant to everything that is cross-functional. I'm able to filter that through that really quickly. Now, one thing that I tried to get a little clever on, but still need some more time with the formulas is I want to be able to make this single select where all I have to select is a role. And it would still include the cross-functional. Thought I got it done, but turns out the way that I'd built my filters, it then ignored the level data. It was kind of messy, but I know it's possible. I just, that's one level deeper that I haven't gotten. But we presented this last week, and it already has some support, and I'm excited that we'll be rolling this out, hopefully within the company fairly soon. And obviously, this means that we'll be able to contribute to this much, much faster, right? And one dramatic advantage is, as you can imagine, when one of these changes, say even one word, we don't have to go through every single one of these documents or these other tabs and change that. So a lot of power in just what we see here.
I'm curious.
That's the competency framework.
Were people complaining or showing frustration towards the Google Sheet, or was it just happened to be the project that you worked on for the internal hackathon?
it just seemed really heavy for what it was. I mean, as I said,
Gotcha.
like, you know, that same data is copied in every single one of these tabs. There's really no
Right.
good way to organize everything. It's very static, and updating this thing would have been a huge undertaking. It's not agile at all. And
Hmm.
so there was a desire to move away from this as a page, for that matter.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, I can see here like you have to scroll right to kind of see your levels progress, and I definitely like the way you did it, where it's like you're scrolling down to see the competency levels.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was interesting, right? And it was an interesting thing because it forced me to, as well as the folks that I was working with, to kind of rethink the data structure.
Hmm.
Because in this case, obviously, I'm just writing up a table, right? But in this case, I have to think about it as a database, right? That means that with each one of these line items, I need to expressly call out these three values, which is different than the way that I might have written a spreadsheet. And so I really enjoyed this exercise because it made me, it forced me into thinking about this as a database versus as a table.
Hmm. Yeah, probably one of the biggest kind of mental like switches you have to go from a spreadsheet to Coda tables is like thinking in terms of a database versus like a regular list of stuff. So yeah, definitely hear you on that.
Right.
Um, this doc says Earnest Research. So is this kind of like your internal wiki for everything at Earnest, or is this like just your own kind
That
of prototype? Or
Yeah, this is the prototype. That's the intent, though, is this
okay,
becomes the single source of truth, the sort of ground truth, the home for as much as we can possibly do. And you know, frankly, I'm still kind of in this phase of asking other folks, you know, how that I would love to ask you how you would structure things at the company, because you know, I definitely see this like main core hub, and then I sort of see team hubs, right, and potentially like project docs. That all sort of contribute in different ways. I do see a lot of stuff happening inside of this document, though.
hmm,
So that's why you see it kind of built out. A lot of these are experiments, like of the different kinds of pages that I can imagine being set up. Some of them are working and have been set up very explicitly. But like, for example, this one is very much in progress, where I want to be able to create a database that pulls from Google Calendar about like who is available when, who
hmm.
is currently out, and like frankly, all of this is already working. Where I'm going to get really clever is in building out relative dates. You know, to be able to say things like they're out of the office next week or next month, or things like returning tomorrow. Very natural language. And that's not a function that is built in or a formula that's built in. So I'm like working on different ways of making that happen. The other thing is I'm working on a sort of translation table, so that
Hmm.
we're able to convert anytime somebody's email is mentioned. Imagine Google Calendar integrations, Slack integrations, things like that, and be able to convert it into a Coda user, that we are able to kind of then create a table that uses like the Coda user object as opposed to an email address. So those are the
Hmm.
kinds of things. Those are like what I'm thinking through with this.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we can spend so much more time looking at your Earnest Research talk, but definitely want to give you some time to talk about your two other ones. I guess
Sure.
last question I had just more about the process is you mentioned right
Hmm.
before you showed the doc was even at a company of 100 people or so, you get some pushback when introducing new tools, introducing new processes. Did you feel like the pushback was more people like not wanting to try a new tool, or that they were just so um, stuck to existing tools like Confluence, Google Sheets that they've already been using for years and years?
Honestly, there's a good amount of openness to new solutions, with the understanding that like, you know, you can't easily just it can create whiplash. And I personally have
Hmm.
experienced this with my last startup, where I was the one that kept pushing the new tools, and the whiplash was happening because I was the one sending people, oh, here's this new thing, right?
Yeah.
And so the thing is like, to make a decision on a new tool, especially one that has an intention to be sort of the wiki for all, like my biggest goal was to create the single source of truth, which meant that like that has a lot more work that has to go into getting the org on board.
Mhm.
What ended up being the thing that made sense was finding the use case that sort of cracked the shell, exposed just how more powerful this thing can be, and what new ideas can be generated from that can then subsume all of the other tools, right? So you find the one use case that is not possible in these other sets of tools, that then sort of shows the crack in the wall for everything else, and then you can get that into the org. So that's what I did with this. This particular project became the example, and now that we will be able to begin to deploy it, it will be very clear as to why this is the tool of choice. And now we can start to cannibalize the use of Confluence, some Google Docs, and other processes within the org.
Cool. Yeah, I feel like change management is a very, very, interesting subject that we can talk about for days and days. So very, very cool to see you starting with a small use case.
Totally.
Awesome. So doc number 2.
Next use case, doc number 2. So I was inspired by this doc that was built by, Malcolm Bastian. I don't know where Malcolm is, but I was kind of impressed with how he did this stand-up doc, where you have this really nice interface to be able to add bits of information, what I'm working on, blockers, announcements, do I need help, how are you feeling, those kinds of things. And then it aggregates, quite nicely into this summary. I liked some of this, and it was different than some that I had already been working on. For example, I had been working on, let me try to see if I can find it.
I don't know if you're sharing your screen right now, but we can't see anything.
Oh, yeah. That would be very helpful. Let me fix that. Resume. Here we go. Got it. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so this was Malcolm's. I liked this where I could, here's an update, here's a blocker, here's all these things. It was definitely a different way of thinking about it than I was working on already. And then obviously there's like a summary of all the information that the individuals are putting in there. In contrast, this is the thing that I was building, which was way more basic, where you would add a row, and then I would get in here and it would be, me, and then here's the thing that I did today, so on and so forth. And as a result, it was pretty simple, right? But it meant that you could get the information in there and make it pretty easy. The one thing that I did have in this that I thought was interesting was blockers became its own database. And I could say something like, this thing is blocking me. And that added that as an active blocker down here. I could then associate that and say, this person is the person responsible for blocking me. And the benefit there is that another person could also reference the same thing. Turns out, like, wasn't as necessary as I had thought. So again, situation where you get a little clever, you have unlimited power, and so you go and build these things.
Why not?
So then when I saw, right. So then when I saw this example, I thought it was really elegant. And so I took some of those ideas and built them into this concept that is called wrap-ups. Now, I had also demoed this at our demo day, and I called it Project Burrito. The idea of wrap-ups came to me from the guys at Linear, the sort of like Jira competitor, really awesome product. But the idea behind wrap-ups I thought was really brilliant, because it is essentially the solution for stand-ups for the distributed team, Whereas stand-ups are purely synchronous and you have to do them together, and anybody who is not there with you doesn't get the benefit of what happened during that. It's kind of, it's great when you're all in the same office at all the same time, but it's definitely not great when there's participants that are not able to be there. So their idea was wrap-ups. You do it at the end of the day. You say all of the things that you did for that day, any blockers, the typical things that you would contribute in a stand-up. But then when you commit that wrap-up, you're off for the day. And it does two things. One is it communicates to everybody that is sort of looking that, one, you're signing out. And two, here's everything that I did. So it gives you some good perspective so that we can get back into things tomorrow. It's perfect for where there's a time zone discrepancy. So like if you have so like European colleagues like I do, that when they sign off, I just want to know what they did. And that way I can contribute mine at the end of the day. And when they wake up the next morning, they can see everything that I did. And it's perfectly asynchronous. So I just kind of blended these things together. So our entry form, one thing that's very different, functionally it works very similar. So specifically how this works is there's a table that powers this that has the updates themselves. I have different categories, and I've left those categories open in this like table down here. Added some conditional formatting so that I get this nice presentation of updates and blockers, for example. And then the other thing that I added is this concept of highlights. And I'll get into that in a second. That is not in the other example. And then left in the ability to create likes. So all the data is in here. What's happening on the entry form, which the example that I'd gotten from was the daily stand-up from Bastian, is you're just aggressively filtering this out. So I'm removing every column except the update text, because whenever I contribute this, I'm telling it, oh, that person field, make sure it is the user that is logged in. The date is today, like all of those things. And then I'm filtering for exactly that. Only show me things from this current user. Only show me things that are today, and only show me things that are of the update type. So that when I say, giving a presentation on Coda, gave, there it is. I'm still able to see that until the transition to tomorrow, right? Tomorrow it won't be there. And I'm able to drop in anything that I want. The other thing is I do have a conditional on the pre-filtered text. That's because I'm trying to build Coda templates where they're pretty clever, where I hide the complexity from whoever is using it. So they don't have to worry about like all the nuances that are happening in here. And so they don't need to know anything about how, like, what rows mean or anything like that. They're just doing what it tells them to do, like writing some stuff, right? And they just keep going. Now, the next clever thing will be to automatically remove stale, accidentally added write update here blocks. But that's the next thing. So I can just arbitrarily add as I would care to. Now, the one addition that I added was this concept of highlights. And I did this to make it super easy. There's a highlight.
Is that pulling from a Make Time book from Jake Knapp? Or
so that's a great point. No, it just happens to be called the same thing, but you can kind of think of it as a reverse highlight. Yeah, because so Jake Knapp and John Zaratsky, so they have this concept of you kind of start the day with what your highlight is, the one thing you want to get done, or you intend to get done, and you call that your highlight. And I love that as a concept. In this case, it's more about communicating an important thing that you did. So in theory, they could actually be the same thing. But that's so that at the end of the week or at the end of a particular period, a team leader might be able to pull together all the highlights and ship that as a team update, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more about like, let me just capture as much information as possible, right? Those are all of the individual updates, and then make sure that I'm able to call out when there is a particularly interesting update. Adding all the rest of this information, super duper easy. Get my pulse check in here, feeling great. And that's my day, right? That's as simple as it is. And then once other team members have contributed, I can go to this daily summary and see what's happened. Now, with the new update, I've gone ahead and rejiggered it where previously this was just another page in that folder. But now this became the landing page, so that this section is, kind of has all these sub pages. By the way, I would love to be able to hide a sub page from this table of contents, but not this over here as an idea. But then I'm able to see, here's the wrap up summary for today. Here's all the updates. What I like about this is that as others contribute their updates, it's going to collect them all together. So here's all the updates separated from all the blockers, which I think is great. And then the highlights here are going to be bumped up. So no matter where I put them in my list, for example, if I go back to my entry form and I make the second thing my highlight, when I go back to the front, that will be the thing on top. So just always trying to call those sorts of things out, just the little bits that you can do to help the formatting of this kind of information. And so when all this stuff gets pulled together, I have this history tab. What's awesome is I can go back and see, the historical timeline of all the stuff that's been done amongst me and my team. Granted, you see me, it's just all me because I'm just continuing to build this out to get to the team. I'm actually demoing this to the whole, or we're going to start to deploy this week. But I'm able to see the whole history of each of these days that have been contributed. And then the intention is that we'll be able to use the awesome email features and Slack features that you've got to be able to send this stuff out automatically. So I'm really excited about how that's going to go. But that's wrap ups. That's the second big thing that we got going.
That's cool. So is the idea that the entire team is supposed to look at this at the end of the day asynchronously to see what's happened? Because I feel like if you're looking at the who needs help today view, you probably want to look at that maybe near the beginning of the day to see who might need help throughout the day, I suppose.
Right. And in that case, the other view that I'm thinking about is that who needs help is just stateful. It's not about today. It's about what are open help requests that are not yet fulfilled.
I see.
So that's sitting in the wrap-ups data where I just haven't built that last portion of it, right? I want that to be a little bit more about, see, that's the difference between how I had built the blockers before, right? Where the blockers were stateful and you would say whether or not you're no longer blocked and whether to archive that. I kind of like the idea that just needing help is more stateful. So that's where that shifted. I just haven't changed the language in there. It's a really good point to call out.
Gotcha. So I know you're a huge fan of, huge proponent of distributed teams and remote work. Has anything changed for you in terms of, to this new world of, the pandemic and working with team members across different time zones?
So yes, the thing that is different, I'm going to pause my screen just so I go back to my video for a moment. The thing that is different is that the construct of the office is no longer there. Now, previously, my last team was fully distributed, and so that was never even needing to be a consideration. We always knew that we weren't going to be able to be all on at the same time, so we had built all of our tools and processes to make it work. Now you've taken a team that was largely not distributed. Granted, we had a lot of processes and tools in place where it was an easier transition than I'm sure some teams have had. But frankly, the office it's an easy way of getting everybody onto the same schedule, onto the same sort of timeline. Here's your meeting rooms, all those kinds of things. This being different, man, documentation becomes critical, and making the contribution to that document super easy is also really important. And so that's where a lot of the inspiration for something like this comes, because, you know, we've had times where for one reason or another, somebody couldn't join the stand-up, and then we're like posting that stand-up information elsewhere. But then like after a while, it's useless. Like the data is useless. So really like finding a way where you're not just throwing information into the void, but rather actually like making good use of it day in and day out. That's where I feel like something like this can shine, by just putting a little bit of structure behind it, still making it just as easy to contribute as, say, sending a Slack message or something. In which case there's tons of power that could be grabbed from that with like automations and like, if I use this emoji, then pull that into code. Like there's tons of cool things that could happen. But yeah, there's a lot of things that are necessary to make very meaningful changes, from the way that we were working before to now.
Cool.
Documentation is it. Communication is critical.
Yeah. So there's a key takeaway I get from this doc is no more stand-ups, think burritos, wrap-ups. That's the news.
Wrap-ups. Wrap-ups, not stand-ups.
It's a stand-up of 2020, the wrap-up.
I think for Coda, what I think was really cool about this one, and what, again, each time I'm trying to think of, you know, I know the tool set and I have a reasonable understanding of the formulas. I'm only like 2 months into this tool, so I'm like just really in the deep end already. I try to think of new concepts of how to use the tool with each one of these things. And in this case, it was, here is a page that has essentially been filtered to the logged in user. So anything that I interact with on this page is all about me, but it's all being contributed to a thing where it's grabbing everybody. And so I think that's really cool, as a concept. And I think there's a lot of potential power in that. Now, the one thing, and you might tell me this is already possible, or you might tell me that it's on the roadmap and on the way, but like, that competency framework, if I take the same concept back to the competency framework, and I start changing toggles and I say, show me levels 3 and 4 and only show me engineering, that is very specific to me, but that is changing that view for everyone. So there are some views where I would like to be able to be, to remember that it's just me looking at that, right? And almost like I don't know what you call that, a preference or something. Yeah. Those are the kinds of things that I'd love to see.
Yeah, there's some like trickery you can do that, which I've seen in docs where it's like you have a list of all the users in your team, and then for that user you have like, here are their like preferences for all the things they want to see. They only for, you know, John Smith, they only want to see levels 3 to 4 for engineering or something, and then when they go into doc, it automatically gets filtered to those preferences, so to speak. But all of them are just stored in a table, basically. Yeah.
And that's exactly how we're going to solve that same problem. The only wrinkle that we found in that is there is some questions around our European colleagues and how GDPR comes into contact with that. You know, that by entering their information into this, even automatically, say via like an integration with Okta or something like that, we have to see how that gets figured out. So it's not super straightforward, but shouldn't be that hard to solve. But you're absolutely right. That's exactly how we were thinking of solving it too.
Yeah. Cool. Well, last but not least, I'm super excited about this doc. When you told me you're gonna show this one, I was like, can't wait. So I'll let you kind of do the backstory and just do your thing. So tell us about the last third and final doc.
Well, I'll give a little bit of a lead in for that with some sound effects here.
Ooh. That was awesome.
So oh, you know what? Actually, let's just keep that going here.
Wait, there's more than that jingle? There it is.
Get our background going here.
Yeah.
So can you hear it okay still? Like, is it
no, it's, I think it's the right volume. Yeah.
Okay, great. So
it's making this conversation really tense.
I know, right? A friend of mine and I are playing with this new app that is kind of like voice chat, right? Not video chat, but it's like all voice. And we were just, I don't know. He was thinking that a new format for this voice chat app could be a game show. So he tried, I think it was Wheel of Fortune on the onset. Sorry, this is really distracting because unfortunately on my end, I'm hearing it at full volume where you've got the nice little lower.
Yeah,
this is crazy.
It's really nice background music. Yeah.
So what I loved about that was I was like, all right, cool. We have this new format. We have this new idea. It could be engaging. You know, what's the next game? And Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was the idea because it can be done entirely through voice. Mm-hmm. But there's lots of issues with that, right? We needed to be able to, you know, sort of have contestants and questions, and like the coordination and the level of production that we had to bring to the table was pretty high to make this convincing and fun. So I was like, cool, I'm going to do two things. One is I'm going to build out a soundboard that has everything, such as, you know, final answer. Oh, I'm sorry, but you'll have to, you know, like just that kind of thing where you can really dial it in and have a lot of fun with it. But then, you know, the difference is like I'm sitting here in the quote unquote control room, and Shane is the one that is on the stage with the contestant doing the questions. He needs to have like a very specific kind of view, one that is focused, easy. I need to have a very specific kind of view where I'm able to kind of manipulate things quickly and, you know, literally be that control room. So, of course, I was like, I think we can do this Coda. We ran the first one using just like an Apple, or it might have been Coda. Yeah, I think it was, but it was like a really simple doc. And then when we decided we're going to do this.
Oh, sorry. And are these contestants just like your friends that are playing? Or?
So the app is this app called Clubhouse. I didn't mention it because it's like really annoying and people are like talking about it on Twitter and like, how do you get in and all this kind of stuff. But like, just happened to get in, right? And it's this private beta or whatever. It's going to be awesome. The only reason it's closed right now is like the UX is like, they really got to figure this out. It's not building hype, anything like that. It's like, they literally have challenges before they can open it widely. But the way that it works is you have a voice chat and there's people that are the speakers. And then there's people that are in the audience, right? Anybody in the audience can't speak. Anybody that is on the speaker can speak. So the way that we sort of hacked this was Shane and I are always in the speaker slot. And for the fastest finger, right, which is that like who clicks their buzzer fastest and then gets the question right, we would just invite up a certain number of people. Everybody is speaker. Everybody has their mics unmuted. And then they just have to shout the answer. And whoever shouts fast enough gets the hot seat, right?
Okay.
And then once they're in the hot seat, then we're playing the game, right? It's Who Wants to Be 100-air, right? Because all we're shooting for is like $100. And then we run through the questions, right? And I do the sound effects and I do all these things. But I built a Coda doc to power the game. And so let me fire this back up.
And so this is what you and Shane see, right?
Correct. Okay. So I have an administration view, and then I have a stage view, and then I have a control room view. So first I'm showing off like the admin view. This is the questions view. So what we did was I have two databases on here. I have questions and I have answers, and that allows me to create these nice little blocks of answers. And so when I add a question, it is, you know, right, whatever you want to add to it. And then as you add answers, I'm just doing, you know, this. Now, there's even more fancy ways that I could make this work. But it turns out that like a little bit of simplicity meant that I could get this done a little bit quicker, right? And it's it could definitely be fancier, but this is good enough for me and Shane for the moment. I don't know why this emoji is not entering, but that is how a question would get set up. We would deem it of a certain level, and then you might add some extra lines of trivia in there, just to be able to say something about that question when all is said and done. So then what I did was I categorized all these things by the different levels. So here we have level 1. At the very bottom, you have level 0, which is our fastest finger. There's only one answer to these questions, and it's just whatever they shout out and say. So that's where this like using answers in a separate database really became super helpful. So with each one of these questions, I have my question, I got my answers, I got a little bit of trivia, and I got our level. There's actually more columns to it, but I'll get into why in just a second. So that's our Q&A, right? And I can also see questions that we've previously asked, but I am filtering out any questions that have been asked as a part of a game. So now let's go to the control room. This is what I see in the given day. So I'm going to start a new show, and I'm going to say, what's our date today? 5/4/2020. So there's our new show. And the game level is 1, right? Which means there is our question values. I have that set up in a different database, which is like questions 1 through 5. What are the different values that are associated with them? And then I might add any notes that I would care to for the game, and that's that. Once the game gets started, during that fastest finger, what I realized was, okay, we're going to have a contestant, but we don't know who the contestant is yet, right? So I made this button, which is just fired up a new contestant blank page, right? And I have all these different kinds of things. It says, you know, here is the contestant name, right? So mid, when they announce the fast finger, I can, you know, just jump in here, start the new contestant, and I'm going to change this to new contestant. So I have which contestant is on the stage, and I'm going to change this to new contestant. Now, here's where it gets kind of cool. I'm going to open up another, oops, I just hit reload. I'm going to open up another window. I'm going to set these side by side. And I'm going to open up the stage. So on the left is what Shane sees. On the right is what I see. Okay. And now that new contestant is up there, now I know who the contestant is. I know that it's Al Chen. You can see that on Shane's view, he now has the name. And as he starts interviewing the contestant, I can start adding in notes that I would care to.
Oh, and then Shane sees that on his end. I see.
Shane sees that on his end, right? And then we have a lifeline that is kind of unique. We came up with the lifelines that were going to be somewhat unique to the way that things worked with just voice only. And so one of them is called +1. And the idea behind it is that you have a person that you pick before you get on stage that you can call on at any point in time. And that's different than phone a friend, because phone a friend, you can arbitrarily pick anybody, right? But what we liked about this one was, you know, whoever you pick might not know the answer to that question. And it's kind of just fun. You keep that +1 around at all times. And so, you know, whoever they pick, I just put in there, and there it is, right? So now that we have the basics in here, we can get going into the game. Fastest finger, right? Now we're going to say that they have answered the question correctly. What's cool about this is I have made it where not only do I select the question, which now means that question is now associated with this person. So if I look at my game history, I'll not only be able to know which questions were asked, but on which game, and were answered by which person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of pretty powerful in that. So then we're going to say it's correct, which now, as you can see, it has gone away from Shane's view. That question is no longer there. And Al, you move on to the next stage, which now the question value is buck. So far you've earned 0, but here's a whole new list of questions that you can ask. Now, on Shane's view, I made it larger so that it was kind of easier to focus, as well as I could really put some focus on this trivia question or answer or trivia bit. But it's kind of neat because then as the question gets selected, the one thing that I haven't done yet is it should actually move that question to the top so that is the one that he knows. I mean, obviously he already picked it, right? He's clicked on it. But that's the one to go up there. And then as the question gets answered correct, it obviously filters. And then the next question goes on and so on and so forth. The only other thing that wasn't mentioned was obviously he's using the lifelines as we go on. So I can go in here and remove the lifelines as they're used. So at all times, Shane knows what lifelines are left. And that's pretty much it. Like, the big principle being here, like, I love this idea of being able to have a more complicated view for me to manage the game, and then have a really simplified view that works off of the same data set to be able to do some really neat, I don't know, live events in a way that might not have been possible otherwise.
Right. It's almost like you're kind of the producer and Shane is like the radio host or something, and he just has all the needs for him to, talk to the contestant.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
I guess my most important question for me is, has anyone won the $100 yet?
Oh yeah. Turns out there's just some really smart people on here. And there's been some questions where I was like, as a matter of fact, on the one big game, the question that I thought might stump people was, in Norse mythology, the ravens named Hugin and Munin sat on the shoulder of what deity? Do you know the answer to that question?
I don't know half the words in that question.
The answer is Odin. They were his all-seeing ravens and all this, whatever. So I happen to know this. But what's funny is, like, whoever was in the hot seat didn't know the answer to that question. At that moment, Naval Ravikant was in the room.
Wait, what? He was playing your game?
Naval was in the room.
in the clubhouse.
And so then we're like, all right, well, let's bring up an expert. And he got picked. And Naval comes up, and turns out he's just incredibly informed in Norse mythology, and like had the question right away. And so the contestant won. And unfortunately, like, that's one of the hardest parts. I can build the most amazing document, but knowing like where to place questions and how hard they are and stuff like that, turns out is really hard. So that is not a role for me that I would say I'm well suited for. but yeah, so we've had some winners. It's been a lot of fun.
That is crazy. So like, this should be like a case study for Clubhouse or for Coda or for something, for both of us. It's like, you were able to do a game show where Naval Ravikant was in the hot seat playing Who Wants to Be 100 Air, and he won this $100 or whatever. That's pretty cool.
He was actually the phone a friend. He was like in the audience, and called him up. But still, I mean, really fun.
Yeah.
But look, it would not have been possible if we weren't able to build something like this. And obviously, what I've got going on here is like, reasonably advanced for what we needed. But it really made it so that Shane could just be as on point as he wanted to be for the sort of announcing of the game, which, you think about radio dramas, they have to be really good to be as good as video, because there's all the things that you could otherwise rely on, lighting and dramatic faces and all these things that you don't get in an audio setting. And so we just had to dial it up so much, and building something like this enabled that.
And you were playing the sound effects too, right during the game, or
That is correct.
so you were the question moderator slash sound guy slash production. Basically, you did everything behind the scenes.
Correct. Yeah. So I try to make it as seamless and easy as possible for me too.
Yep.
So that and I'm using, I don't know if I can actually I can't really get it up there, but I'm using a device called a Stream Deck, which is kind of neat. It's like it's made by a company called Elgato, really designed for like gamers who do streaming video.
Okay.
But you can program macros into buttons, and then each button has a little tiny screen behind it. So I'm able to like dynamically change it. Honestly, I use it for Zoom a lot. So I have like unmute me, mute, turn on video, turn off video, share my screen. So it's like the most boring use case of this thing ever. But
Yeah.
like, how many times do you find yourself like hunting for that tiny little mute button to
Right,
make sure
right.
you're muted? So in this case, they have a soundboard feature where I can just drop in all the sound effects that I would care to, and I just laid it out so that I don't even have to really look at it. I can just know, oh, that's where, little bit of applause goes a long way.
Yeah.
Just like all the little things that I'm telling you, like just amp it up so much more than what you would otherwise be able to have.
This is elgato.com. Is that right?
Yeah, they make a lot of
Okay.
cool stuff. Like right now, I'm using their key light, which if I turn it off, you'll notice the difference. But this is without the key light, whereas with, kind of really bumps up the production value of my face, which needs the help, right? And so the idea is like they make a lot of cool stuff that is kind of built for gamers.
Yeah, no, I might check out this the Stream Deck that you're talking about. It looks like a really neat little soundboard.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Very cool. Well, Regis Philbin, eat your heart out, I guess.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. I know we have a special guest coming on in a bit, but if there's anything you want to share with the audience before we wrap up, like, Pichero will come on in a bit, but anything you want to share in terms of your experience building out these docs for work, for fun, that you want to just kind of impart on the audience, feel free to share.
Totally. There's one last thing, which is like what Shane and I have figured out through kind of building these things together is, Shane has sent a handful of texts out. He's just at Shane Mack. He was really shocked at what could be done with this, because I think, he's used and dug in on quite good at Quip and a handful of other tools before. But after seeing what we did with 100 Air, he was really kind of blown away. And the other day, he asked me, like, could we build an entire back end for a company to run off of? And the specific use case in his case is he has a company that he co-founded called Squared Away, where they pair military spouses with, say, anybody in knowledge work that needs an assistant. And, it's a fully remote kind of setup. Well, they have this hodgepodge of Harvest for time tracking, Gusto, Google Sheets, Google Docs, like just as many tools as you could possibly imagine, and an insane amount of manual work, where you have like the associations between, say, a client and an assistant and all the billable hours associated with all, just as much as you can imagine. And he's like, could we build this infrastructure out in Coda? And so, I felt very confident that you could do something like this and started to spec it out. And then as we've been doing it, have found all kinds of neat things. Like they have a document where in one of the pages, like in a Google Sheet, they have like the pro rating of a given month, right? Let's say I'm starting as a new client and it's the 15th day of the month. They have this document, which is like, for this package level at this date, in this month, you know, it's this amount, right? And so much of that is manual. And I built like a formula that all you have to do is punch in the date and it will figure all the rest of that out for you. I use like end of month to figure out how many days between the date that you say and the end of month. And I do the division, then I, you know, all this stuff. And it's like with one elegant formula, they never have to worry about that manual work of building that table again. And we're finding so many of these examples. I'm excited because like, I want to use this as a case study for how companies can build the back end they always dreamed of while still being on a platform that has maintainability, right? Because sure, you could go hire an engineer and pay them, you know, tens of thousands, hundreds of $1,000s to build the back end that you want. But if you can get 80, 90, I mean, sometimes even 100% of the way there on a platform that with a little bit of training, you know, somebody could, you know, grok all the things going on and maintain the thing, that's huge. And I get really excited about that. And so, you know, on the weekends, I'm working with them a little bit on getting that document set up. And I hope that it works, because if it does, like, you know, I think there's a huge potential for anybody out there to really level up businesses they might be, you know, in touch with, to just consolidate so much and make, you know, everything a lot easier.
Yeah, I just
think it's really cool.
I just shared the Go Squared Away link in the chat. Really awesome mission, military spouses that basically become your personal assistants.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Very, very cool concept. Awesome. So I'm going to actually invite our special guest, Shashir. He is the CEO of Coda. He may have some questions for you, Matt, and also for those who are still in the meetup in the audience. Thanks for sticking around. Shashir will be around to answer any questions that you have as well. So Shashir, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. By the way, I got after the last time we talked, I got myself a little key light, so I've got
nice.
It's not nearly as yours looks way better than mine.
Man, I think I need to start getting some commissions from these guys. I can't imagine how much between the tweets and all this.
I think I got a cheaper one because I was like, I don't think I really need it, and then I probably should have just gotten whichever one you recommended.
Oh, this thing is a little silly because I don't even have this thing cranked. This is like this is as bright as it can get, and so it's cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mine. Yeah, this is mine, and yeah, it's good, but it's
gets the job done.
Yeah. Hey, those docs were really awesome. I was you had mentioned sort of building up to that third one, but that was pretty epic.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I guess one question I had, it's sort of an interesting watching you build out these docs, and for the other people on the call, Matt and I connected maybe a month and a half ago, as you were just getting started on your journey. So it's awesome to see how far it's come since then. Yeah, I'd love to hear, you know, your wish list. What's in the like, I wish it did this. You gave one already that I immediately sent a note to the team about user level controls. By the way, we have a hackathon this week, Thursday and Friday, and so there's a set of people, like, you know, going through ideas, and so I'm sure there's a set of people that are going to use that as fodder for, hey, we should go do this. But yeah, give us you get to be king for a day. You can do anything you want.
Oh man, there's so many. Well, a couple that I can tell you that I know of right now is there is the function where I can like click a button with another button.
Yeah.
What I would love is the ability to control a control. So where I have set up like a date or like in a multi-select, like have already a number of things pre-selected, I'd love to be able to make a button that is reset, which then basically goes in and sets a default value for every control on a page. So you essentially being able to manipulate any control with the same action as me being able to do the push button action.
Right.
I think that would be that'd be great. It'd get me so far.
By the way, just a little bit of inside baseball on that one. I'm realizing this field of view of this camera is like in this tiny vertical pane. I have to stand right here. It's actually, so controls are actually tables underneath. So both of your apps, like the user level control and the ability to change it, are both technically possible. The thing that has held us back on both has been coming up with the right kind of syntax and mental model for it. But I mean, both are very possible. The change there is a workaround. It's kind of related to the one Al mentioned earlier. You can create a table of controls, hide all the Chrome. You sort of hide the headers, hide the lines, and then you can control that with a button. It's not. I mean, it looks a little less janky now because we've gradually reduced the cruft around these Chromeless tables, but it's not really ideal. And I saw like your wrap up doc. You want something that can like go through and have different controls in different places and be able to select them. So that's a good one.
The way that you do filters, though, I like that if I ever want to do a filter and have it look at a multi-select or even your conditional formatting, I know that it knows the values that are sitting inside of that column. And so I could imagine that whatever you're doing to populate that, maybe you could do something similar to populate, where I might be able to just configure very specific things for those controls. So whatever the MVP could potentially be. That would be awesome. Let me think here. There is definitely something. I got to find the right doc that triggers my memory on this. Oh gosh,
we gotta get a soundboard in Coda. That's my thing.
Yeah,
my takeaway is getting a soundboard.
Yeah, sound effects.
Sound effects. Yeah.
I was saying we did. I don't know if you followed in the chat, but there was a past hackathon project where someone built a expansion of buttons to do a bunch of fancy things like send animations through your document and be able to do sound effects. And there are some really good examples and there are some really juvenile ones as well. As you could probably imagine.
Of course. The other thing I can think of is like, I really want that relative date thing because the idea that I can say that something happened yesterday or in 2 days, or, if I can set up that hierarchy and have it be specific kind of to my desires and then be able to do a grouping based on that. Oh my God, the power that could unlock, because imagine groups where the closer to I get to a date, the more granular it gets. So I see yesterday, today, tomorrow, but then it would say next week, next month. And so being able to group things based on that relative time versus always the same sort of like 5 day or 7 day chunks or 30-day chunks or whatever, I think that would be so cool.
And you're thinking both input and output. Like as you type in a date, you want to be able to say yesterday or 2 days from now.
I mean, listen, input it would be a nice to have. I'm saying output. I want to be able to configure a date field, and instead of using the actual date name, let it be the relative term, or have it be a formula, which I know you guys, that's how you probably build things, but like let me reference that date field and have it say, because the use case that originally inspired this was, I want to be able to create a vacation calendar, and I want to be able to say, this week these people are out, next week these people are out, next month this is who is on vacation, right? And I think there's a lot of things that can be unlocked with something as simple as that. It's
the formula. Go ahead, sorry.
No, in Gmail, if you do like the Gmail headers, I think it's like one of those little experimental settings. It will do this, and it'll say like yesterday, this week, this month. I just think that for organizing certain kinds of content, that's super powerful.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it with the formula. You end up doing it with a big switch if.
If less. I've been trying to build that for a couple of weeks now, and it is daunting.
Yeah.
If, listen, if somebody can figure that out and just drop it in, I will say, like, I'm getting better at the formulas, but I still haven't been able to crack that one completely. So that's an easy thing to drop into the community. But like, man, a formula where I can do that. See, because here's the other thing that the formula doesn't account for, which is I don't think that it would order things perfectly. Because if you had the like yesterday, today, this month, next month, I don't know how it would come out the other side. If you used group by and then sort by, I don't know how the formula-based one would get there.
Okay, this seems like a good puzzle.
I love the idea of this, and I think it would be so useful. And look, you can hold me accountable if you find out that nobody is using that formula. But
no,
if you did ship it, but I think I don't know. There's something about it that just seems like there's some power there.
I was going to ask you, what did you think of? I saw you're getting used to the new pages. What do you think of that?
I love it. I think it makes a ton of sense. I love the flexibility that it can provide, as well as like, that I don't have to create like a home page that sits at the top of a folder to orient somebody around what they're about to see, but rather like they can just jump right to that section. I do love that. The other thing that I like about it, and by the way, another feature request, previously, prior to this build, when I opened up a doc, all folders were collapsed by default. And that annoyed the hell out of me, because if I want this to be a team wiki, I wanted all those expanded by default. And now that the sections are the way that they are, don't necessarily need that, right? Where they're all expanded, because I can create these sections that are the lead-in to whatever it is that I have that might be, below that in the hierarchy. But previous to that, I would say that I did want those folders expanded by default.
Right.
But it was just because of how I was using it. So off the bat, great start.
Yeah, that was, and it turned out to be a pretty tricky, it's a thing. When we first did sections and folders, the logic was basically, who needs more than 2 levels of these things? Just, famous last words. And then we watched users, and there was a lot of question about, is this is that going to be too complicated? Will people understand it? And then we watched people do all sorts of hacks, do the thing you said, and they put a thing at the top of their folder. We saw people naming things in certain ways that caused hierarchy where hierarchy didn't exist. And so this was sort of a nice way to do it. And the team snuck in a few little Easter eggs there. So one of my favorites is, I think we didn't actually announce this yet, I think it's going to announce this week, is you can take anything, you can now drag it into a page. And you can do that into the header as well, like the little sub page header. And so you can use that for like, here's updates that are done, or here's a table I want to move to a different place. And so it ended up being a destination for like a drop target for drag and drop, which is also pretty interesting. Let's see, David has a question. I had the same problem in publishing. Are sub pages in published docs asking for a friend? Yeah, they are actually, and I would love feedback on it, because sub pages in published docs probably extended the rollout by a week, because it took a lot of debate to figure out how to do it and what way to make them work. And for the designy folks on this call, you'll notice there's a design pattern there for the top header. So in a published doc, you can switch your pages to be on the top instead of on the left. And there's a design pattern there that is not very typical. And it's, we'd love feedback on whether we got that trade-off right or not, but they're definitely there.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll have a look. I have one more request.
Yeah.
And this one is harder and will take a lot more thought, and probably is not going to get done in a hackathon, but I'll show you the screen and why I want this feature, and I'll be curious what you think. So this harkens back a little bit to what I was saying earlier about like building custom backends to power something for a business. So I started to do this for a local brewery that I'm currently wearing the hat of, Lost Tavern Brewing in Hellertown, Pennsylvania, that I absolutely love. And I've been wanting them to build out a very easy mobile ordering, say like with SMS, where they send out a link and you just pick what you want. And then there's all these checkout solutions now where all you have to feed it is like a dollar value, and then somebody can check out with Apple Pay. All that stuff's wonderful. But building the order, turns out, is really hard, right? Unless you're actually building out some sort of like proper checkout flow. So what I did, if I could share my screen real quick, is I built out this, which is actually an adaptation of something that I had seen, which was like a purchase order document that I had seen elsewhere. I would love to be able to make this customer facing, where I can share a link. They can go in and manipulate these things as much as they want. They can somehow type in their name, whatever, and then be able to submit this order. What I'm able to do now is send out a doc that, sure, they can manipulate some of these things and you could get to this value, but it would not actually record that information on the back end. And so then when the order is submitted, this back end where I can actually fulfill the order would not be present. I would love to be able to look at this and see, like, here is this specific order. I can see it's in progress. Somebody's, getting ready to fulfill it. Those kinds of things. So the feature specifically is, I would love it if I can give a link where I've specifically said that the people that are interacting with this page are allowed to interact with it and they don't need a Coda login. Lots of spam issues there. Totally get that. I know that this is not something that can be easily solved, but like, I want to build surveys that use Coda's interface that I've custom built. I want to build all kinds of things that allow for user interaction without logging in. That's my dream.
It's a great request. We built half of it. So we built anonymous logged in usage. So you can now publish a page and you can choose whether you want to be use your actual data or not. We didn't build it such that it'll work if you're logged out. Right. But it's very great request. And you're not the only one with that request. There's probably a broader family of, and this I think is maybe another topic to stick in your hopper of things to think about. A lot of these things are really, some people might describe them as forms. And yes, the challenge with the word form is it means, like, forms mean very different things to different people. And, sure, I found that there's a set of expectations of those forms that people want things that, like, every forms package would do what you said, right? You don't really have to be logged in, or you can acquire it or so on, but it also usually couldn't pull data and tell you something about the current user. And
right.
So there's sort of like, where should you set that is sure, has been one of the challenges. But these precise request of interact with the doc without logging in is a common request on the list. Definitely possible. I just haven't done it yet. So we did halfway.
Cool. Yeah, I hear you. I just know that, like, I would love to be able to ship this for these guys. And so that was something that was top of mind for me. But look, there's a lot of stuff this thing can already do. So I know that I'm just asking for more, and you probably got lots of folks asking for more, but that's what I see.
Oh, we love it. I mean, I think one of the pleasures of building a product like this is, I think that before this, I was responsible for the YouTube products over at Google, and YouTube's a wonderful product, but the community for YouTube is really awesome, but the alignment wasn't always there. The community wanted things that were not necessarily aligned. That's rarely the case here. I mean, I don't think anybody makes a request where we think, that's a bad idea. Like, it's usually, we really want to do that too. And so it's fun to build products that way.
For sure. for sure.
Yeah. We're a little over your time.
Yeah, well,
It's okay.
thanks.
Yeah.
Really, thank you, Matt, for sharing your story, your background, and of course, your 3 awesome Coda docs, especially 100 Air. Hopefully, you can publish that so other people can take advantage of it. And thank you, Shashir, for joining as well from the West Coast. And perhaps Matt will see you at some point in a clubhouse at some point in the future once we get access to the data.
One of these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we'll be there with Evolve Ravicon.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah.
All right.
All
Thanks for
right.
having me.
Well, thanks everyone, and hopefully
Thanks, Matt.
we'll see you at next month's June meetup. Take care, everybody.
Cheers.
Thank you.